The fog came to the Ruhr Valley like a living thing. February 6, 1945, it swallowed the broken churches and shattered factories and the frozen bodies of soldiers who had died the day before. It turned the world into nothing but gray and cold and the certainty that death was coming for someone. In the bell tower of what used to be St. Bartholomew's Church, an American sergeant named Frank Peterson settled behind his rifle and closed his eyes. Below him, in that impenetrable fog, 24 German soldiers were making their final plans. Not one of them knew they had less than an hour to live. Not one of them would see the bullet coming. Neither would Frank, because in 47 minutes he was going to accomplish something warfare had never witnessed. He was going to kill 24 men without ever seeing their faces, violating direct orders that could end his military career or save 700 American lives. The radio at his side crackled with words that would define everything. All sniper units stand down, 0 visibility conditions, no shots authorized. Frank Peterson heard those words, acknowledged them, and then did something that would change the war in ways no one would talk about for the next 27 years. To understand how one American sniper could fire into complete blindness and eliminate an entire network of enemy spotters with impossible precision, you need to go back. Back before the war, back before the uniform, back to a place where the skill that would one day save hundreds of lives was being forged in the freezing forests of Montana during the worst economic disaster America had ever seen. Frank Peterson was born in Whitefish, Montana in 1919, the son of a Norwegian immigrant lumberjack and a schoolteacher trying to feed a family on wages that kept getting smaller. The Great Depression had turned hunting from sport into survival. You brought meat home or you went hungry. It was that simple. By the time Frank was 14 years old, he could track a wounded elk through dense fog by sound alone. By 23, he could map an entire battlefield in his mind using nothing but ambient noise and instinct refined over a lifetime. By 26, on that frozen February morning in Germany, he would use those impossible skills to prevent a massacre that could have cost over 1,000 American lives. But the technique he used that day was not in any military manual. His commanding officers had not authorized it. His fellow soldiers thought it was impossible. When Frank fired his first shot into that wall of gray, even his own spotter thought he had lost his mind. What happened in those 47 minutes would change how American Special Operations Forces fight in conditions where seeing becomes impossible. It would earn Frank Peterson a Silver Star with a citation so carefully worded it revealed absolutely nothing about what he actually did. And it would haunt him for the rest of his life because killing 24 men you can never see leaves scars that no metal can heal. This is the story of how one Montana hunter became the deadliest sniper in the European theater by doing something the United States Army said could not be done. How his decision to trust his ears over his orders saved hundreds of American tank crews from a coordinated Luftwaffe attack. And how the moral weight of those 24 invisible kills shaped the man who returned home to the quiet forests where it all began, before the fog, before the war, before Frank Peterson became the soldier who would break every rule to save lives. There was a boy learning to listen in the Montana wilderness, learning from his father that the eyes can deceive, but the forest speaks truth to those patient enough to hear it. Because the greatest military innovations do not always come from generals or research laboratories. Sometimes they come from a lumberjack's son who learned to hunt what he could not see in a place where one mistake meant his family went hungry through the winter. This is where it started, in the cold and the hunger and the desperate need to bring meat home when visibility dropped to nothing and conventional wisdom said it could not be done. Winter in Whitefish, Montana, 1933, the kind of cold that turned breath into ice before it left your lungs, the kind of poverty that made every missed shot a tragedy measured in empty stomachs and sick children. Frank Peterson stood in the pre-dawn darkness next to his father Samuel, 14 years old, and shivering, despite the wool coat wrapped around his thin frame. His father moved through the forest with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that noise meant failure and failure meant hunger. They had been tracking a wounded elk for 2 hours. Frank's younger sister Ellen was sick with fever. Their mother Margaret was stretching beans and potatoes to feed 4 people on money meant for 2. This elk was not just meat, it was survival through the winter. Then the fog rolled in. It came fast the way it always did in these mountains. Thick gray walls that swallowed everything. Visibility dropped to mere feet. Frank could barely see his father 5 yards ahead. Samuel Peterson stopped, held up one hand. Frank froze. Then his father did something the boy would never forget. He closed his eyes. 3 minutes passed. Neither of them moved. Frank wanted to ask what they were doing, why they were standing still when their quarry could be escaping, but he had learned years ago that when his father went silent, there was a reason. Samuel opened his eyes and pointed northeast. He leaned close to Frank's ear, whispered barely audible over the wind, "Elk." 300 yards that direction, labored breathing, favoring the right side, scraping sound every few seconds when it shifts weight. It is bedding down. We move now. Frank stared at his father. They could not see 20 feet through this fog. How could he possibly know where the elk was? But they moved northeast, slowly. Carefully. After 15 minutes of patient stalking, they found the elk exactly where Samuel said it would be. One clean shot, meat for 3 months. That night in the barn, butchering the elk by lamplight, Frank asked how his father had known. Samuel Peterson set down his knife and looked at his son with eyes that had seen too many hard winters. The eyes can deceive, especially in fog or darkness. But the forest speaks truth to patient ears. That elk was telling us exactly where it was. We just had to listen. Over the next 8 years, Frank Peterson learned to listen. His father's Blackfeet friend, Joseph Running Elk, taught him the old tracking methods. How to identify animals by the rhythm of their movement, how wind and weather changed the way sound traveled, how to build a three-dimensional map in your mind using nothing but audio cues, and the patience to stand perfectly still. By 17, Frank could locate a deer in thick brush without seeing it. By 20, working as a forest ranger, he had developed a reputation among local hunters as someone who could track anything in any conditions. Some called it uncanny. Others whispered about supernatural gifts. Frank called it patience, the willingness to stand still and let the world reveal its secrets to those quiet enough to hear them. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. The news came over the crackling radio in his ranger cabin. Japanese bombers, thousands dead, America at war. Frank Peterson stared out at the snow-covered pines and thought about his father's words. The eyes can deceive, but the forest speaks truth to patient ears. He wondered if a battlefield could speak too, if the skills that kept his family alive during the Depression could keep American soldiers alive in a war no one wanted, but everyone now had to fight. 3 weeks later, January 1942, Frank walked into the Army recruiting office in Kalispell. He left behind his job, his fiancée, Sarah Mitchell, the only home he had ever known. What he brought with him was something no drill sergeant could teach, a lifetime of learning to see with his ears, to hunt what he could not see, to trust the whispers of the world when his eyes failed him. The United States Army had no idea what to do with that skill, but in 3 years, Frank Peterson would use it to change the course of a war in ways no one could have predicted. Before Frank could become the sniper who would violate direct orders to save hundreds of lives, he had to survive military training, a system that valued conformity over innovation, that taught snipers to see their targets, calculate distance, account for wind, and then take the shot. The Army had no manual for what Frank could do, no protocol for soldiers who claimed they could locate targets by sound alone. When Frank tried to explain his abilities during basic training, the reactions ranged from skeptical to openly mocking. One instructor wrote in his evaluation, "Unorthodox techniques not suitable for field deployment." What would happen when Frank's impossible skills collided with military doctrine? The answer would define his entire war. Fort Lewis, Washington, March 1942. Rain fell in sheets as drill sergeants turned civilians into soldiers. Frank Peterson excelled at most of it. The physical conditioning, the weapons training, the discipline, his marksmanship scores were exceptional, 98 out of 100 possible points. But during a night navigation exercise, people started to notice something unusual. The exercise was simple. Navigate through dense forest to a checkpoint 2 miles away. No flashlights, only compass and map. Most teams took 3 hours stumbling through darkness, arguing over directions, occasionally getting completely lost. Frank's team arrived in 45 minutes. The supervising officer demanded an explanation. How had they moved so quickly in complete darkness? Frank tried to explain. The checkpoint had a generator running. He could hear it from the starting position, could track its location as they moved, could adjust their route based on the acoustic feedback. The officer stared at him like he was insane. The notation went into Frank's file. Recruit Peterson demonstrates unusual spatial awareness, recommends psychological evaluation. The evaluation never happened. But word spread among the training cadre. His fellow recruits gave him a nickname, Hawkeye, for his supposed supernatural perception, though some less charitably called him the blind man when they thought he could not hear. Advanced sniper training brought him to Camp Perry, Ohio. Here the skepticism intensified. Sniper doctrine was precise, scientific, methodical, visual identification of the target, calculation of range, adjustment for wind elevation, temperature, humidity, then and only then the shot. During a low visibility exercise, Frank requested permission to demonstrate his acoustic targeting technique. Sergeant Major Howard was a decorated veteran of World War I with 17 confirmed kills and no patience for what he called circus tricks. Permission denied Peterson. Snipers engage visual targets. That is doctrine. That is what works. Your Montana hunting stories are interesting, but this is war. We need skills we can teach, replicate, and rely on, not some mysterious ability that only you claim to have. Frank did not argue. He had learned that arguing with superior officers was pointless. Instead, he did what he had always done, listened, learned, waited for the right moment. That moment came during a night exercise, simulated enemy encampment. 3 sniper teams searched for 2 hours, found nothing. Frank's team with Corporal Carl Jensen as his spotter located it in 20 minutes. How Carl asked later, away from the instructors. The target was completely blacked out. No lights, no noise discipline violations, nothing. Frank explained. They were trying to be silent. But silence is not the absence of sound, it is the suppression of normal sound. You can hear the difference. Where nature sounds stop, where bird calls do not reach, where the ambient noise has a dead zone, that dead zone was their position. Carl Jensen stared at him with something between awe and fear. Frank, that is not in any manual. That is not something they can teach. How do you even begin to explain that to a commander? You do not, Frank said quietly. You just do it when it matters. And hope they care more about results than methods. But the training establishment cared deeply about methods. Frank's final assessment included a warning: unorthodox techniques not suitable for field deployment. Recommend conventional sniper employment only. He graduated with high marks in every measurable category, but the message was clear. Whatever he could do in Montana forests had no place on a modern battlefield. In May 1944, Sergeant Frank Peterson was assigned to the 30th Infantry Division and deployed to England. His spotter was Carl Jensen, the same corporal from sniper school who had witnessed his night navigation skills. They were being prepared for something big, though no one would say exactly what. June 12, 1944, 6 days after D-Day. Frank Peterson landed at Omaha Beach. The sand was still stained with blood. He stepped onto French soil and thought about his father's words. The eyes can deceive, but the forest speaks truth. He wondered what truth a battlefield would speak, and whether the army would ever let him listen. The hedgerow country of Normandy was nothing like Montana. Ancient field boundaries of dense brush and earth turned every farm field into a fortress. German machine gun crews made these natural barriers into killing zones. Frank operated conventionally, identified targets visually, calculated range, accounted for wind, took the shot. He was good at it. By August 1944, Frank had 38 confirmed kills. He earned a Bronze Star for clearing 3 German machine gun nests during a single engagement near St. Lo. His platoon commander praised his patient's precision ability to remain calm under fire. But Carl Jensen noticed something else: the frustration in Frank's eyes whenever smoke or mist rolled in and they received the order to stand down. How Frank would close his eyes and tilt his head, listening to something no one else could hear. The tension in his shoulders when targets escaped because visibility had dropped below acceptable levels. One evening in late August, cleaning rifles in a bombed-out barn near Mortain, Carl finally asked, "You hear something out there, do you not?" Frank did not answer immediately. He loaded his rifle, checked the bolt action, stared out at the darkening countryside. "I hear everything. German patrols moving through wheat fields at night, officers arguing over maps in bunkers 300 yards away, machine gun crews setting up in pre-dawn darkness. I can map their positions, estimate their strength, predict their movements, all without seeing them." He paused. "Then we get the order to stand down because we cannot visually confirm. The next morning we walk into an ambush we could have prevented if we had just been allowed to trust what we heard. Have you reported this to command?" Frank looked at him like he had suggested something insane. "You read my file, Carl." You know what the training instructors thought? Circus tricks, unorthodox techniques not suitable for field deployment. If I tell the captain I can kill targets I cannot see, he will either laugh or send me for psychological evaluation. Either way, I am finished. So what do? I document it. Every time I identify a target by sound that we cannot engage because of visibility restrictions. Every time we take casualties that could have been prevented, I write it in my log. Maybe someday someone will care. Maybe they will not. But at least I will have the record. That record would matter sooner than either of them expected. September 1944. Operation Market Garden, the ambitious Allied plan to seize bridges across the Netherlands and punch through into Germany before winter. The 30th Infantry Division supported the British advance, providing flank security. Frank and Carl positioned overlooking the Sun Bridge. The battle was going poorly. Unexpected German resistance, coordination problems, deteriorating weather had turned what should have been rapid advance into grinding attritional fight. Then the smoke came. German forces retreating across the bridge deployed smoke generators to cover their withdrawal. Thick, acrid clouds rolled across the river, obscuring everything. Frank closed his eyes and listened. Through the chaos of artillery and small arms fire, through the rumble of engines and shouts of soldiers, he heard something. German voices, officers coordinating defensive positions on the far side of the bridge. He could hear 4, maybe 5 of them, calmly discussing fields of fire, artillery coordinates, reinforcement schedules. They were setting up a counterattack right now under protective cover of smoke that rendered Allied observation useless. Frank grabbed the radio. "Captain Morrison, this is Peterson. I have audio contact with German officers approximately 400 yards northeast. They are coordinating defensive positions. Request permission to engage." The response came immediately. Negative, Peterson. "Zero visual confirmation. You are not authorized to fire blind. Stand down." "Sir, I can pinpoint their location. I can hear them planning a counterattack. If we do not engage now, we will lose the element of surprise. Sergeant Peterson." The captain's voice was sharp now. "That is an order. You do not fire without visual confirmation. Is that understood?" Frank stared at the impenetrable wall of smoke. He could still hear the German officers, still track their positions by their voices. One shot for each target. He could take them all before they knew what was happening. But orders were orders. Understood, sir. Standing down. Carl looked at him. What do you hear? 4 German officers setting up a counterattack. Probably hit us in about 2 hours. Right around dusk when our visibility is worst, and theirs does not matter because they know the terrain. Can you take them? Frank did not answer. The answer did not matter. He was not authorized. The smoke cleared after an hour. The German officers were gone. Their planning complete. 2 hours later, exactly as Frank predicted, the counterattack came. Precise, well coordinated, exploiting weaknesses in the Allied line. 17 Americans died in that engagement, 3 from Frank's own platoon, including Private Martinez, a 20-year-old kid from Arizona who had shown Frank photographs of his baby daughter that morning. That night, Frank sat in his foxhole and wrote in his log, September 19th, 1944. 4 German officers coordinating counterattack at approximately 14:30 hours, location identified by audio contact, visual confirmation impossible due to smoke, request to engage denied per standing doctrine. Subsequent attack at 16:30 hours resulted in 17 killed in action, 23 wounded in action, could have been prevented. He showed the entry to Carl. What are you going to do with this? I do not know, but I know one thing. If I am ever in this situation again, if I can hear the enemy preparing to kill our men, and I have the skills to stop it. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Carl understood. Sometimes following orders meant watching men die, and sometimes the choice between obedience and initiative was the difference between decorated sergeant and court-martialed failure. Frank just did not know which one he would become. Not yet. To understand why Frank Peterson's skills would matter, you need to understand the war he was entering by early 1945. The Allied invasion of Europe was succeeding, but success came with brutal casualties. German defenders fighting with desperation of those defending their homeland exploited every advantage. One of their most effective advantages was weather, fog, smoke, darkness. These were not just inconveniences. They were tactical weapons. When Allied forces could not see, they could not coordinate air support, could not call in artillery with precision, could not advance without risking ambush. Standard operating procedure was clear. Low visibility meant stand down, wait for conditions to improve. The risk of friendly fire, of wasted ammunition, of troops moving into unknown situations was too high. German forces knew this. They studied Allied doctrine and exploited it ruthlessly. When fog rolled in, German units maneuvered aggressively, repositioned artillery, relocated command posts, all under protective blanket of reduced visibility. By the time Allied forces could see again, the tactical situation had changed. American casualties from these weather exploitation tactics were significant. Over 15% of combat deaths in the European theater occurred during or immediately after periods of low visibility when German forces maneuvered undetected and Allied forces stumbled into prepared ambushes. The United States Army needed a solution. But military bureaucracy moves slowly, constrained by doctrine, regulations, the need for techniques that can be taught, replicated, standardized. What the Army did not know was that a sergeant from Montana had already developed a solution, not through military research or tactical innovation, but through a lifetime of learning to hunt in conditions where seeing was impossible. Frank Peterson was about to discover that Montana forests and European battlefields had more in common than anyone realized. Both spoke to those patient enough to listen. Both revealed secrets to those brave enough to trust what they heard over what they could see. The Ruhr Valley in winter looked like a vision of hell. Shattered factories belched black smoke into gray skies. Rivers ran dark with industrial runoff. Artillery had torn the landscape into cratered moonscape where nothing grew and everything smelled of cordite and death. The 30th Infantry Division arrived mid-January 1945 as part of the U.S. Ninth Army offensive to encircle and capture this vital industrial region. Military intelligence estimated success here would shorten the war by months, depriving Germany of production capacity it desperately needed. But there was a problem, a significant problem costing American lives at an alarming rate. The briefing came January 18th. Frank and Carl sat with 30 other sniper teams in a freezing warehouse, while Major Wilson from G2 Intelligence explained the situation. Gentlemen, we have an enemy innovation proving extremely effective. The 23rd Specialized Reconnaissance Group, Luftwaffe personnel, approximately 150 men organized into 30 teams of 5. Former pilots, most of them who cannot fly anymore due to injuries or lack of aircraft. Wilson pointed to a map dotted with red marks. These teams are mobile, well-trained, equipped with radio gear that lets them coordinate airstrikes with devastating precision. They identify our positions, relay coordinates to German bomber crews, disappear before we can locate them. American casualty rates from air attacks in this sector are 3 times higher than comparable sectors. How do we counter them, sir? Find them and kill them. Your mission is to locate these spotter teams and eliminate them before they can coordinate attacks. Rules of engagement are standard. Visual identification required. Confirmed hostile action before engagement. Frank felt Carl tense beside him. They both knew what was coming. Now here is the complication. The Ruhr Valley has unique weather conditions. Industrial emissions combined with natural moisture create fog that can last for days. Visibility can drop to 20 yards or less. When that happens, doctrine is clear. Sniper teams stand down, wait for conditions to improve. Wilson paused. The problem is German forces do not stand down. They use fog as cover to maneuver, to reposition, to prepare attacks. By the time we can see again, they have gained significant tactical advantages. We have lost over 200 men in the past month to attacks coordinated during low visibility periods. After the briefing, Frank and Carl walked through ruined streets toward their assigned observation post. Carl finally spoke. "You are thinking about it, are you not? Thinking about what market garden? Those German officers in the smoke. What you could have done if you had been authorized." Frank stopped at a destroyed church, its bell tower still partially standing despite artillery damage. He looked up at it. Good sight lines from up there. 80 feet of elevation, clear view of valley approaches. Frank. He looked at his spotter. "I have been thinking about it since Normandy, Carl. Every time we stand down because visibility drops, every time we hear enemy movement, we cannot engage. I have been testing the technique. 3 weeks now, every foggy day, every smoky battlefield, tracking enemy positions by sound alone, comparing them to where we find bodies after fog lifts. And I am accurate to within 10 yards at 400 yards range. I can distinguish between different German unit types by movement patterns and conversation topics. I can estimate unit size by density of ambient noise. I can predict where they will be when fog clears." Carl stared at him. "Frank, that is impossible." "No, it is improbable. There is a difference. It is just a skill most people do not develop because they never need it. But I have been practicing this my entire life. If the Luftwaffe spotters are out there during the next fog and you can hear them preparing to coordinate an airstrike on American positions, do you think you should follow the order to stand down or trust your judgment and take the shot?" Carl did not answer. There was no good answer. Following orders meant potentially watching hundreds of Americans die. Disobeying orders meant court-martial at minimum, execution for insubordination at worst. That evening, Frank sat alone in the bell tower of St. Bartholomew's Church on the eastern edge of Jülich. The sun set over the scarred valley painting industrial ruins in shades of orange and red that almost made them beautiful. He opened a letter from Sarah. She wrote about small-town life, how his mother was teaching at the school again, how his sister Ellen wanted to become a nurse to help soldiers like her brother. Sarah's words were full of hope and love and plans for after the war. She believed Frank was a hero doing heroic things. She had no idea her hero might become a criminal tomorrow. Frank pulled out his journal and wrote, "February 5th, 1945. Tomorrow the fog comes. Tomorrow I choose. Follow orders that doctrine demands or trust skills that a lifetime developed. Obey the command structure that keeps armies functioning or trust judgment that might save hundreds of lives." I keep thinking about Dad's words. The eyes can deceive. He never told me what to do when the orders deceive too, when following rules means watching men die. If I take that shot tomorrow, if I fire into fog at targets I cannot see, I violate every regulation. Court-martial minimum, execution possible. If I am wrong, if my training fails, I could kill Americans by mistake. But if I do not take that shot and those Luftwaffe spotters coordinate attacks, hundreds die. Men with sisters like Ellen, fiancés like Sarah, mothers teaching in small-town schools in Montana. No one can tell me which choice is right. Not Major Wilson, not Captain Morrison, not even Sarah with her letters full of faith in my heroism. Tomorrow I choose. Whatever happens, I live with the consequences, both the men I save and the rules I break. I just hope I have courage to choose correctly when it matters most. February 6th, 1945, 0400 hours. Frank and Carl climbed narrow stairs of St. Bartholomew's bell tower in complete darkness. Their breath formed clouds in freezing air. Neither man spoke. There was nothing left to say. They reached the belfry 80 feet above valley floor. The bell had been removed by Germans in 1943, melted down for war effort. Now the empty space provided perfect 360-degree observation post. Frank set up his Springfield rifle. Carl arranged his spotting scope, checked his watch, opened the logbook. By 0600 hours, fog had rolled in thick and heavy. Visibility dropped to less than 20 yards. The valley below disappeared into impenetrable gray void. The radio crackled at 0615. All sniper units, this is Overwatch Command. Weather conditions deteriorated to 0 visibility. All units ordered to stand down. I repeat, stand down. No shots authorized until fog lifts and visual confirmation possible. Confirm receipt of orders. Frank keyed the radio, Peterson acknowledging. Standing down per orders. But he did not move from his position. He closed his eyes and listened. For 8 minutes, neither of them moved. Carl watched him barely breathing. Then Frank's eyes opened. "Do you hear that?" Carl shook his head. I do not hear anything except distant artillery. Close your eyes. Filter out the artillery. It is constant, rhythmic. Your brain can ignore it. Listen for what is irregular. Listen for human voices. Carl closed his eyes. 30 seconds. 45. Then his eyes snapped open. Holy God. German. Southeast, maybe 300 yards. Frank tilted his head, adjusting position slightly. I count 5 voices. Moving west to east patrol formation, discussing coordinates and fuel reserves. Luftwaffe spotters, I am certain. They are talking about the 707th Tank Battalion refueling at a depot near Jülich this afternoon. The 707th, that is 70-plus tanks and support vehicles, scheduled to arrive 1,400 hours. Frank nodded grimly, and these spotters know it, waiting for fog to lift so they can relay coordinates to Luftwaffe bombers, hit the depot when it is most vulnerable, tanks stationary, fuel trucks exposed. Carl reached for radio. We need to warn command. Frank grabbed his wrist. And tell them that we heard German voices in fog, that I can understand their conversation from 300 yards. Without visual confirmation, without coordinates we can prove, without evidence, except my word. Carl stared at his friend. Then what do we do? Frank turned back to his rifle. I take the shot. I eliminate those spotters before they can coordinate airstrike. I save 700 American lives about to walk into perfectly coordinated ambush. Frank, you cannot see them. That is 300-yard shot through dense fog at targets you cannot visually confirm. You will be court-martialed. If you hit friendlies by mistake, they might execute you. Frank began adjusting his rifle based purely on acoustic information. I have spent 3 weeks testing this technique. I know it works. I can place a shot based on sound alone to within 10-yard accuracy at 400 yards. The only question is whether I have courage to trust that skill when it matters most. This is not authorized. Carl's voice was almost pleading. These are not approved tactics. Frank looked up at him. Do you think those German spotters care about authorized tactics? They are down there right now using fog. We can see it as useless preparing to drop bombs on 700 of our men. If I do not take this shot, how will you feel this afternoon when we hear about massacre at that depot? Carl had no answer. The weight of that choice was brutal but clear. 700 potential American casualties versus one sergeant's military career. I need you to do something for me. Track the time between when I fire and when you hear impact. Count the seconds. That will help me adjust for second shot. Will you do that? Carl stared at the Montana hunter, about to do something that would either save hundreds of lives or end his own future. After a long moment, he nodded. What do you need? Frank settled behind his rifle, closed his eyes again, listened with every fiber of his being to German voices below. When he spoke, his voice was calm, almost peaceful. I need you to witness what happens next, because if this works, if I can do what I spent my whole life preparing for, someone needs to remember. Someone needs to know that sometimes survival requires disobedience. That sometimes saving lives means breaking rules. The radio crackled again. All sniper units confirm standing down. Repeat, no shots authorized in zero visibility conditions. Frank acknowledged the transmission, then turned to Carl and spoke the words that would change everything. Sometimes the moral choice and the authorized choice are not the same thing. Today, I choose morality over authorization. I choose to save lives over following orders. Whatever happens next, I can live with that choice, because the alternative is 700 dead Americans I could have prevented. He opened his eyes, positioned his rifle toward German voices he could hear but not see, controlled his breathing, slowed his heart rate. Target acquired. Carl checked his watch, ready to time the impossible. In that moment, everything Frank Peterson had ever learned crystallized into single decision. Every skill his father taught him, every hour listening to Montana forests, every frustration with doctrine that valued conformity over results. He was going to take the shot, and nothing would ever be the same. Frank's finger took up slack in the trigger. Below them in fog, 5 German soldiers continued their conversation completely unaware. The fate of 700 American tank crews hung in balance. The future of one Montana sergeant's military career teetered on edge between obedience and initiative. Carl whispered, almost praying, if you are wrong about this, I am not. Frank paused. But if I am, make sure Sarah knows I died trying to save lives, not take them. The rifle cracked. The sound echoed across the valley. 3.5 seconds later, somewhere in fog below, a German voice cried out once and went silent. Target 1 eliminated. Frank's voice was steady, adjusting for Target 2. The impossible had begun. The rifle cracked and the sound rolled across the Ruhr Valley like thunder trapped in cotton. Frank Peterson did not move, did not breathe, just listened with every fiber of his being for what would come next. 3.5 seconds, the distant thud of impact, a brief cry that cut off almost before it began, then silence. Where there had been a voice, Carl Jensen stared at his stopwatch, then at Frank, then back at the impenetrable fog below them. His hands were shaking. Hit. 3.5 seconds. I cannot believe. How did you? Frank was already adjusting his aim. The panicked German voices erupting from the fog below gave him new data, new coordinates, a clearer picture of where the remaining 4 targets stood. His mental map was updating in real time. Voice 2, the team leader, had moved left, seeking cover. Voice 3 and 4, the security personnel were frozen in confusion. Voice 5, another radio operator was reaching for equipment. Target 2. Frank's voice was mechanical, emotionless, like he had disconnected from what he was doing and become pure function, pure calculation. He exhaled half a breath, held the rest. His finger took up the slack. The rifle cracked again, this time 3.2 seconds. Another impact, another voice silenced. The remaining German voices were shouting now, not coordinated communication, pure panic. They had no idea where the shots were coming from, no idea that 80 feet above them in a shattered bell tower, an American sergeant was hunting them through fog using skills learned tracking elk in Montana winters. Frank worked with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times in his mind. Target 3, fire, 2.9 seconds, impact. Target 4, fire, 3.1 seconds, impact. Target 5, fire, 2.8 seconds, impact. 20 seconds from first shot to last, 5 German soldiers, 5 kills. Not one of them ever saw what killed them. Carl's voice came out as barely a whisper. 5 for 5. Frank, what you just did is it should not be possible. Frank was already reloading. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory taking over while his mind processed what his ears were telling him. Listen. Carl closed his eyes, strained to hear through the muffled acoustics of the fog. Then his eyes widened. More teams. Oh God, there are more teams out there. Frank nodded slowly, at least 4 more within effective range, maybe 19 more men total, all of them Luftwaffe spotters, all of them preparing to coordinate airstrikes on American positions, all of them about to die without ever knowing why. He looked at Carl, his spotter, his witness, his only connection to the authorized world he was leaving behind with every trigger pull. You have 24 rounds remaining in my ammunition pouches. That gives us exactly enough if I make every shot count. No room for error, no margin for mistakes. Carl's voice was hoarse. Frank, what you are doing right now, this is going to change everything. You understand that there is no going back from this. Frank settled back behind his rifle, closed his eyes, listened for the next team. I know. But 700 Americans are about to arrive at that fuel depot. If these spotters coordinate an airstrike, how many of those men die? How many mothers get telegrams? How many children grow up without fathers? He opened his eyes. I can live with being court-martialed. I cannot live with watching 700 men burn because I was too afraid to break the rules. Target 6 acquired. Team 2 was 350 yards northwest. They had heard the deaths of Team 1, were taking cover, moving cautiously, voices lowered to urgent whispers. Frank waited. Patience was the hunter's greatest weapon. His father had taught him that. Joseph Running Elk had reinforced it. Every successful hunt in Montana had proven it. 8 minutes passed. Carl shifted uncomfortably, wanting to ask what they were waiting for, but he had learned to trust Frank's instincts. Then it came. A German voice, louder now, more confident, speaking into a radio, reporting contact lost with another team, requesting instructions. The moment the transmission began, Frank had everything he needed. Location, distance, wind compensation, trajectory, 4 shots, 18 seconds, 4 more German soldiers joined their comrades in death. Carl marked the times in his logbook. His handwriting was getting shakier with each entry. Team 2 eliminated, 9 total. Frank was already tracking Team 3, but something was different now. His hands had developed a slight tremor, not from cold, not from exertion, from the weight of what he was doing. He thought about the Montana elk, the one his father had tracked through fog when Frank was 14, how seeing the animal's eyes afterward had haunted him for weeks. How he had felt the moral burden of taking a life even for survival. Now he was taking lives he would never see. Men who had families, who had been children once, who had dreams and fears, and people who loved them. The choice was clear in his mind. 24 enemy soldiers versus 700 American lives. The justification was sound, but justification did not account for the weight. The knowledge that somewhere in Germany, 24 families would receive news that their sons, husbands, fathers were never coming home. Carl noticed the tremor. Frank, are you? Target 11 acquired. Frank forced the doubt away, forced the humanity away, became nothing but function and precision and the cold necessity of war. 5 more shots. Team 3 eliminated, 14 total kills. Then something changed. As Frank tracked Team 4, approximately 300 yards due east, he heard something that made his blood freeze. The German officer was speaking into his radio. Frank's German was limited, but he caught specific words, coordinates, target priorities. Mönchengladbach, Mönchengladbach. That was where 9th Army headquarters was located, where over 300 Allied officers coordinated the entire Ruhr offensive, where 2 American generals and the British liaison staff planned operations. Carl saw Frank's expression change. What is it? What did you hear? Frank's voice was tight. This is not just about the fuel depot. They are planning a decapitation strike. They are going to hit 9th Army headquarters, kill the entire command structure in one coordinated attack. The implications hit both of them simultaneously. If the Luftwaffe managed to destroy Allied command and control in one strike, the entire offensive could collapse. The war could be extended by months. Tens of thousands of additional casualties. Frank was not just preventing one attack, he was preventing strategic catastrophe. 5 more shots. Team 4 eliminated, 19 total kills. His hands were steadier now. The moral weight had not disappeared, but it had been joined by renewed certainty. This was not just justified, this was essential. Team 5, the last group within effective range, 400 yards southwest, the maximum distance where Frank trusted his acoustic targeting completely. They were dug in, quiet, professional, probably the most experienced team, the ones who had survived this long because they were better at their jobs than the others. Frank closed his eyes, filtered every sound. The distant artillery became background static. The wind through ruined buildings became predictable patterns. The occasional bird call became reference points. And there, hidden beneath layers of ambient noise, the sound of careful breathing, the tiny scrape of equipment being adjusted, the almost inaudible whisper of a leader giving hand signals to his team. Frank built the picture in his mind. 5 men, spread in defensive position, 15 yards between each, professional spacing, good tactical discipline. This would be his most difficult sequence yet. He opened his eyes, made minute adjustments to his rifle position, calculated the pattern, started with the flanks, worked toward the center. Do not give them time to scatter. 5 shots, 42 seconds, the longest sequence yet because of the spacing, but effective. Team 5 eliminated. Carl's voice was filled with something beyond awe now, something approaching fear of what he was witnessing. 24. Frank, you have killed 24 men in 47 minutes without seeing a single one of them. This should not be humanly possible. Frank set down his rifle. His hands were shaking again, this time not from doubt. From the realization of what he had just accomplished, what he had just prevented. 24 German spotters who would never coordinate another airstrike, 700 American tank crews who would arrive at the fuel depot and live, 300 Allied officers at headquarters who would continue planning operations that would end this war, and 1 Montana sergeant who had just committed the most technically impossible feat in the history of modern warfare by violating every rule in the book. That is all of them in range, Frank said quietly. Whatever happens now, we have done what we came to do. Carl looked at him. The fog was beginning to thin slightly. Visibility had improved to maybe 50 yards, still not enough to see the valley floor, but the weather was changing. In another hour, maybe less, they would be able to see what Frank had done, see the bodies, see the evidence of impossible shots. What happens when they find out? Carl asked. When command discovers you took 24 unauthorized shots during stand-down orders, Frank leaned back against the cold stone of the bell tower. Exhaustion was beginning to set in. The adrenaline that had sustained him for 47 minutes was fading. I honestly do not know. Court-martial, probably. Dishonorable discharge, possibly. But those 700 tank crews will be alive. That has to count for something. He pulled out his journal, added one more entry. February 6th, 1945. 24 confirmed kills in zero visibility conditions. Acoustic targeting only. Prevented coordinated Luftwaffe airstrike on 707th Tank Battalion refueling operations and 9th Army headquarters. Violated direct stand-down orders. No regrets. The fog began lifting at 11:45 hours. It happened gradually at first, then faster, like a curtain being drawn back on a stage to reveal the scene behind it. Carl stood at the edge of the belfry with his spotting scope, watching the valley floor emerge from gray into definition. When he finally saw what the dissipating fog revealed, he went completely silent. Frank joined him, looked down at what he had done. 5 distinct groupings of bodies, scattered across the valley at the exact locations where Frank had heard the German voices. 24 men lying dead in the positions where they had been standing when bullets they never saw had found them. Carl's voice was hollow. 19 headshots, 5 center mass. Frank, the precision. From this range through that fog, based only on sound, he could not finish the sentence. Frank said nothing, just stared at the evidence of impossible shots, at the proof that everything he had been testing for 3 weeks actually worked, that the skills learned hunting elk in Montana could be weaponized on a battlefield in ways no military doctrine had ever imagined. Carl descended to the closest grouping, came back 20 minutes later with photographs and items he had collected. His face was pale. Detailed maps with Allied positions marked, the fuel depot, ammunition storage, artillery positions, and this. He held up a document, Operation Orders, in German. They were scheduled to coordinate airstrikes at 1400 hours when the fog cleared. Target priority Alpha was the tank battalion. Target priority Beta was 9th Army headquarters. Target priority Gamma was field hospitals near Erkelenz. Frank took the document, read it slowly. His limited German was enough to understand the implications. They were not just going after military targets. They were going to hit hospitals, wounded men who could not fight back, doctors and nurses. Carl nodded. You did not just prevent an attack, Frank. You prevented a war crime. These spotters were coordinating strikes on protected medical facilities. The weight of that realization settled over both of them. What Frank had done was not just tactically sound, it was morally imperative. The sound of engines interrupted them. A jeep carrying Lieutenant Dawson from intelligence was approaching fast, drawn by reports of shots fired during stand-down conditions. Lieutenant Dawson stood at the base of the bell tower, staring at Frank Peterson like he was seeing a ghost. Sergeant Peterson, you are claiming responsibility for 24 confirmed kills in complete zero visibility. Frank handed over his nearly empty ammunition pouches and his logbook with time, direction, and approximate distance of each shot. 24, sir. Check the bodies. 24 Luftwaffe spotters who will not be calling in coordinates anymore. Dawson read the logbook entries, looked at the scattered German bodies visible across the valley, looked back at Frank. I need to report this up the chain immediately. What you did is either the greatest act of initiative I have ever seen or the most egregious violation of standing orders. Possibly both. Am I under arrest? Sir Dawson hesitated. I honestly do not know, Sergeant. What you did defies every protocol we have. But those maps you recovered, those operation orders, if what you prevented is what I think you prevented, he shook his head. Stay here. Do not leave this position. I will be back with someone who can make decisions above my pay grade. After Dawson left, Frank and Carl sat in silence. The sun was breaking through the remaining fog now, warming the February air slightly, making the valley almost peaceful. 15 miles away, in a bunker near Düren Hauptmann, Klaus Weber of the 23rd Specialized Reconnaissance Group stared at his radio with growing dread. 5 teams, 24 men, all silent, all failing to respond to repeated calls. His aide, a young lieutenant named Richter, looked over his shoulder. Sir, what could have caused this? All 5 teams lost contact within the same hour. That is not possible unless our communications are compromised, unless the Americans have broken our radio codes, unless they knew exactly where our teams were positioned. Weber shook his head slowly. No, radio intercepts would not give them that kind of precision. This is something else, something we have not encountered before. He pulled out a map, marked 5 locations where his team should have been positioned, drew circles around them, dispatched reconnaissance to each of these coordinates. I want to know what happened to those teams, and I want to know now. 3 hours later, the reports came back. All 5 teams found dead, shot with precision from long range, no survivors, no witnesses. Weber stared at the reports in disbelief. This is impossible. No sniper could accomplish this. Not in that fog, not at these ranges, not without visual confirmation. He wrote in his operational log, catastrophic network failure, 5 teams eliminated simultaneously by unknown means. Assume complete security breach. Recommend immediate investigation for intelligence penetration, radio compromise, or traitor activity within reconnaissance group. Then he added one more line. Alternative hypothesis. Americans have developed capability we do not understand. Recommend treating all current positions as compromised. Klaus Weber had commanded reconnaissance operations for 3 years. He had survived the Eastern Front. He had adapted to every Allied innovation. But this was something beyond his experience. One thing was certain. Whatever had killed his men in that fog was going to change how they operated, because the Americans had just demonstrated they could kill in conditions Weber's doctrine said made killing impossible. By 1500 hours, Major Wilson had ordered emergency relocation of every target identified on the captured German maps. The fuel depot, the ammunition storage facilities, the field hospitals all moved to alternate positions. At 1800 hours, the orders came down from higher command. All units maintain high alert status. Expected Luftwaffe activity at 1900 hours. Frank and Carl had been ordered to remain at their observation post to watch, to document what happened when the German airstrike came without its ground coordination. 1900 hours arrived right on schedule. So did the German bombers. Carl counted them through his spotting scope. 12 aircraft, Ju-88s mostly, coming in from the northeast. They are circling, looking for targets. Frank watched through his rifle scope. The bombers were flying search patterns, trying to locate the positions their spotters should have marked for them. But without ground coordination, without updated coordinates, they were flying blind. American anti-aircraft batteries, forewarned by the intelligence Frank had recovered, were ready, tracking the bombers, waiting for them to commit to attack runs. The first bomber broke formation, dove toward where the fuel depot should have been, dropped its payload on an empty field 200 yards from the actual relocated position. Immediately, 4 anti-aircraft guns opened fire. The bomber tried to climb, too late. Tracers walked up its fuselage. One engine caught fire, then the other. The aircraft spiraled down, trailing black smoke. Over the next 20 minutes, Frank and Carl watched the systematic destruction of German air power. 7 bombers shot down. The remaining 5 dropped their payloads on abandoned positions and fled. Total Allied casualties, 0. Total German casualties, approximately 70 aircrew, 7 aircraft that could not be replaced. Carl lowered his spotting scope. If those spotters had been alive, if they had been down there coordinating those strikes on actual target locations, Frank finished the thought. 700 Americans at the fuel depot, 300 officers at headquarters, hundreds more at the ammunition storage and field hospitals. We would be watching a massacre right now instead of a failure. The magnitude of what they had prevented was almost incomprehensible. One sergeant firing 24 unauthorized shots into fog had just prevented what could have been the single deadliest day for American forces in the Ruhr campaign. At 2300 hours, Frank and Carl were escorted to 30th Division headquarters. The room they entered was filled with officers. Intelligence, operations, even a chaplain for some reason. Colonel Walter Harrison sat behind a desk stacked with documents, the captured German maps, Frank's logbook, photographs of the dead spotters. After action reports from the failed Luftwaffe attack, Harrison looked at Frank for a long moment before speaking. Sergeant Peterson, under normal circumstances, disobeying direct orders during combat operations, warrants court-martial. What you did today violated every standing procedure we have regarding rules of engagement. Frank stood at attention, said nothing. However, Harrison continued, I also have reports indicating your unauthorized actions likely prevented catastrophic casualties, possibly saved over 1,000 American lives, provided intelligence that directly contributed to the successful defense against a major enemy air operation. He paused. I need you to explain exactly how you accomplished what multiple officers have told me is tactically impossible. For the next 2 hours, Frank explained his technique. The Montana hunting background, the Blackfeet teaching about listening to the land, the 3 weeks of testing in Ruhr fog conditions, the acoustic triangulation principles, how moisture and wind affected sound travel, how to build three-dimensional maps in your mind using nothing but audio cues. The room full of officers listened with reactions ranging from skeptical disbelief to fascinated attention. Major Williams from Tactical Operations finally spoke. Sergeant, what you are describing is not in any manual we have. It is not something we train for. It is not replicable across standard units. No, Sir, Frank agreed. But the Germans are not following our manuals either. They are adapting, using weather conditions we concede as operationally useless, turning our own doctrine against us. Then Colonel Harrison did something unexpected. Major, I want a demonstration. Right now. A radio was hidden in an adjacent room, turned on to low-volume static. Frank was asked to locate it. He closed his eyes, stood perfectly still for 90 seconds, then pointed 12 feet that direction, 3 feet off the ground. Likely on a desk or shelf. Officers went to check, came back silent. Exact location, Harrison confirmed. The room fell quiet. What they had just witnessed was either evidence of extraordinary natural talent or proof that Sergeant Peterson had developed a battlefield skill no one had known was possible. Either way, they would be fools not to use it. Harrison made his decision. Sergeant Peterson, I am creating a special detachment, designation Detachment S. You will command it. Corporal Jensen will be your second. Your mission is to continue what you started today. Hunt down the remaining Luftwaffe spotters before they can reorganize. He added one critical constraint that would limit how widely this technique could be taught. The skill you have developed appears to be primarily instinctive, built over a lifetime. We cannot replicate that in standard training, but we can teach basic acoustic awareness to selected personnel who show natural aptitude. Sir, what about the court-martial? Harrison's expression was carefully neutral. Officially, this conversation never happened. Detachment S does not exist. You will report directly to me outside normal chain of command. Your methods will remain classified. He leaned forward. Unofficially, Sergeant, you may have just changed how we fight in conditions we previously conceded to the enemy. I would rather exploit that advantage than punish it. Frank and Carl exited headquarters into the cold February night. Around them, the Ruhr Valley was quiet. The failed Luftwaffe attack had ended. American positions were secure. 700 tank crews were sleeping safely, unaware how close they had come to burning alive that afternoon. Carl finally spoke. What did we just get ourselves into? Frank looked out at the fog starting to form again in the valley below. Tomorrow would bring more low visibility conditions, more opportunities for German forces to maneuver unseen, more Luftwaffe spotters preparing to coordinate attacks, but now there was something new in that fog, something the Germans had not encountered before, an American sergeant who could hunt them in conditions where they thought they were invisible. A chance to finish what we started, Frank said quietly. A chance to save more lives before this war ends. He thought about his father's words one more time. The eyes can deceive, but the forest speaks truth to patient ears. The battlefield spoke too, and Frank Peterson had learned to listen. 15 miles away, Hauptmann Klaus Weber stared at his map in the dim light of his bunker. He had marked 5 crosses where his teams had disappeared, written his report attributing the losses to massive American intelligence penetration. But in his private journal, he wrote something different. Whatever eliminated our reconnaissance teams today was not conventional tactics. The precision, the timing, The impossibility of the shots in those conditions. We are facing something we have never encountered before. His aide knocked on the door. Sir, new orders from Luftwaffe Command. All remaining spotter teams to relocate immediately. Assume all current positions compromised. Weber nodded, made the only decision that made sense. Tell them we are facing a new American capability, something that makes our men vulnerable even in zero visibility. Until we understand what we are dealing with, we operate as if the enemy can see through fog. He did not know how right he was, did not know that the American capability was not technology or intelligence networks. It was one Montana sergeant with a lifetime of impossible skills and the courage to use them when it mattered most. The war in the Ruhr Valley had changed. The Germans just did not understand how yet, but they would learn. Over the next 17 days, as Detachment S systematically dismantled what remained of the 23rd Specialized Reconnaissance Group, Klaus Weber would come to understand exactly what his men were facing. A hunter who did not need to see to kill, a soldier who trusted his ears over his eyes, an innovation born not in laboratories but in Montana forests, where a boy learned to track wounded elk through impossible fog. And by the time the Ruhr pocket surrendered in April, Klaus Weber would write one final entry in his journal. We were defeated not by superior numbers or technology, but by one man who could do what we believed was impossible. I commanded the finest reconnaissance personnel in the Luftwaffe, and we were hunted to extinction by an American who fought by rules we did not know existed. February 7th, 1945, the fog came again to the Ruhr Valley, but this time the Germans were afraid of it. Frank Peterson stood in the same bell tower where he had fired 24 impossible shots the day before, but he was not alone anymore. Detachment S had grown overnight from 2 men to 12, hand-selected snipers from the 30th Infantry Division, men chosen not just for marksmanship, but for patience, for acoustic sensitivity, for the willingness to learn techniques no manual had ever described. Carl Jensen had become the training officer, teaching men to close their eyes and listen, to filter ambient noise, to build mental maps from sound alone. Most would never match Frank's natural ability. His lifetime of Montana hunting could not be replicated in days or weeks, but they could develop proficiency at 200 yards, sometimes 300 in ideal conditions. It was enough. Over the next 17 days, Detachment S would become the most effective special operations unit in the European theater, operating in conditions other units conceded as hopeless. Hunting an enemy that thought fog and smoke made them invisible, the Germans were about to learn a terrible lesson that innovation on the battlefield often comes not from the side with better technology or larger armies, but from the side willing to fight by rules that have not been written yet. Frank Peterson had rewritten the rules. Now he was teaching others to read them. The training was brutal in its simplicity. Carl would position men 200 yards apart in dense fog. They had to locate each other by sound alone. No visual contact, no calling out positions, just listening. Private Danny Martinez from Texas lasted 6 hours before he could reliably triangulate a whisper at 150 yards. Sergeant Robert Williams from Ohio took 3 days to reach 200-yard proficiency. Corporal James Mitchell from Pennsylvania had natural aptitude. Within a week, he could match Frank's accuracy up to 300 yards, but none of them could do what Frank did. The 400-yard kills, the instantaneous target acquisition, the ability to track 5 conversations simultaneously and build tactical pictures from pure audio input. That skill remained his alone, the Montana gift that could not be taught, only witnessed. February 8th through 12th, 5 days of operations across the Durin sector. Fog rolled in every morning. Detachment S went hunting every morning. 23 Luftwaffe spotters eliminated. Frank personally accounted for 9. The rest were team kills. Men applying techniques learned from a Montana hunter who had learned them from his father, who had learned them from a Blackfeet friend, in a chain of knowledge stretching back before anyone could remember. Traditional skills, ancient skills, now weaponized for modern warfare. Major Wilson reviewed the results in disbelief. 23 confirmed kills in 5 days, 0 friendly fire incidents, 0 missed shots. Sergeant Peterson, what you have created here is unprecedented. Frank stood in Wilson's office exhausted. 5 days of hunting left visible marks. Dark circles under his eyes, hands that trembled slightly when he was not holding his rifle, the weight of 33 total kills accumulating like stones in his chest. It is working, sir. The Luftwaffe spotter network is fragmenting. We are hearing radio traffic indicating mass confusion. They do not know how we are finding them in zero visibility. Keep it that way, Wilson said. The moment they understand what we are doing, they will adapt. Your advantage is that they think this is impossible. February 13th through 17th, the Erkelenz to Jülich corridor. More fog, more hunting, 31 additional kills. Frank personally eliminated 11 more. His total was now at 44 confirmed kills since February 6th. 44 men he had shot without ever seeing their faces. 44 ghosts that were beginning to visit him in his sleep. Carl noticed the change, the way Frank would stare at nothing for long minutes. The way he flinched at unexpected sounds, the way he wrote in his journal every night, page after page of words no one else ever read. One evening, Carl found him sitting alone in a destroyed church, staring at the ruined altar. Talk to me, Frank. Frank did not look up. 44 men. Carl, I have killed 44 human beings in the last 11 days. Most snipers in this entire war do not reach 44 confirmed kills in years. I did it in less than 2 weeks. You saved thousands of lives. I know. Frank's voice was hollow. The justification is clear. 44 enemy soldiers dead versus countless Allied soldiers saved. He finally looked at Carl. But justification does not account for the fact that each of those 44 men was someone's son, someone's brother, maybe someone's father. 44 families in Germany are receiving telegrams right now. 44 mothers are crying, you did what was necessary. Frank nodded slowly. I know that too, and I would do it again. That is what haunts me most, Carl. Not that I killed them, but that I can justify it so easily, that the moral weight gets lighter with each kill instead of heavier. What does that make me? Carl had no answer, because he was beginning to understand that what they were witnessing was not just tactical innovation, it was the transformation of a man. Frank Peterson was becoming something different, something the army needed but could not name, a hunter who operated in the space between soldier and ghost. February 19th, heavy fog near Linnich. Detachment S positioned for another hunt. Radio traffic indicated German spotter activity in the sector. Frank and his team deployed to intercept. 0800 hours. Frank identified what he believed was a 5-man German patrol. Movement patterns matched previous Luftwaffe spotter teams. Conversation topics included coordinates and communication protocols. Everything indicated hostile forces. He acquired the first target, prepared to fire, then heard something that made his blood freeze. A single word, spoken in English with a Texas accent. Hold fire, friendly position, repeat friendly position. Frank's finger came off the trigger so fast he nearly dropped his rifle. His shot had been perhaps 2 pounds of pressure away from killing an American officer. The friendly patrol emerged from the fog. Lieutenant Anderson from the 84th Infantry Division. His patrol had been given incorrect coordinates, were half a mile outside their assigned sector. The conversation Frank had heard and interpreted as German was actually Anderson discussing German positions with his men. The shot Frank had been about to take would have passed within 6 feet of Anderson's head. Carl found Frank an hour later, sitting alone, hands shaking uncontrollably. I almost killed him. I was so certain. The movement patterns, the tactical spacing, everything matched German spotter profiles. But you did not fire. Carl's voice was firm. You heard the English. You stopped. The technique worked exactly as it should. Frank looked at him with eyes that had seen something terrible. What if I had not heard it? What if the wind had been different? What if he had spoken 1 second later? I would have killed an American officer because I was too confident in my abilities, too certain that I could distinguish friend from enemy by sound alone. But you did distinguish. That is the point, Frank. Your skill saved him. Frank shook his head. My skill almost killed him. There is a difference. He stood up, made a decision that would define the rest of his operations. New protocol. Every target gets 3 verification checks before engagement. Movement patterns. Conversation content, equipment sounds. If any check fails, we do not fire. I do not care if it means some Germans escape. I will not risk American lives on my confidence alone. Carl understood. What they were witnessing was not weakness, it was growth. Frank Peterson refusing to let his extraordinary skills become a liability through overconfidence. That was the mark of a true professional, not just knowing what you could do, but understanding the limits of what you should do. February 23rd, intelligence breakthrough. G2 had identified a Luftwaffe command bunker near Düren. Aerial reconnaissance showed heavy security. Radio intercepts indicated the remaining spotter team leaders were gathering to reorganize their shattered network. 17 officers, including Hauptmann Klaus Weber, commander of what remained of the 23rd Specialized Reconnaissance Group. Major Wilson presented the situation to Frank. This is not a sniper mission, Sergeant. This is an assault on a hardened position with 20 guards and multiple machine gun emplacements. Attempting this with 12 men is borderline suicidal. Frank studied the intelligence photographs for 6 hours. The bunker was in an industrial area. Constant machinery noise from nearby facilities still operating under German control. Acoustic targeting would be severely compromised. But the guard rotation patterns were visible in the photos. Shift changes occurred every 6 hours. At 0200 hours, there would be a 30-second window when the new guards arrived before the old guards departed. Maximum targets visible, maximum confusion if something went wrong. Frank outlined his plan to Detachment S8 snipers position in a 300-yard radius around the bunker perimeter. We observed guard patterns for 4 hours starting at 2200 hours tonight. At exactly 0200 hours, simultaneous engagement on my command. 16 guards eliminated in the first volley. He pointed to 4 other positions on the map. 4-man assault team breaches the bunker entrance in the confusion. We have approximately 3 minutes before reinforcements can respond from the nearby barracks. 3 minutes to capture or eliminate the command staff and extract with intelligence. Private Martinez asked the question everyone was thinking, and if our timing is off by even 30 seconds, then we face 40 plus hostiles with no support and no escape route, Frank said calmly, which is why our timing will not be off. Carl looked at him. Frank, this is insane. We are snipers, not assault troops. We are whatever the mission requires us to be. Frank's voice had the certainty of someone who had already made peace with the risk. That bunker contains the intelligence that could end this campaign weeks earlier. How many Allied lives is that worth? No one answered. They all knew the justification by now. 0200 hours, February 24th, Detachment S in position. Temperature was -3°C. Visibility adequate for the assault. Light fog, but not enough to completely obscure the bunker. Frank watched through his scope as the guard shift change began. New guards approaching from the east. Old guards preparing to depart. 30-second window opening. His voice came over the radio calm as if ordering breakfast. All positions on my mark. 3, 2, 1. Execute. 8 rifles fired within a half second of each other. The synchronized sound was like a single sharp crack echoing through the industrial district. 8 guards dropped instantly. 16 seconds later, 8 more shots. 8 more guards eliminated. 16 of 20 guards dead in under 20 seconds. Perfect execution. Frank led the assault team himself. They covered 200 yards in 40 seconds. Reached the bunker entrance where the remaining 4 guards were just realizing something terrible was happening. Close quarters battle, suppressed pistols, quick, brutal, efficient. 4 more hostiles down in less than 10 seconds. Explosive charge on the bunker door. 3-second countdown. The explosion blew the door inward. Smoke. Chaos. Frank's team entered fast. 17 German officers inside. Maps spread across tables. Radios crackling with traffic. They were in the middle of operational planning. Hauptmann Weber, younger than Frank had imagined, maybe 35, reached for his sidearm, froze when he saw 4 American rifles aimed at his chest. Frank spoke in broken German, Hände hoch. For a long moment, no one moved. 17 German officers, 4 American soldiers. The odds were not in the Americans' favor if this turned into a fight. Then Klaus Weber made the decision that would save all their lives. He raised his hands. Wir geben uns. We surrender. The other officers, seeing their commander's choice, complied. Hands went up. Weapons stayed holstered. Carl and the others began collecting documents, maps, radio codes, communication schedules, operation orders. The intelligence windfall was extraordinary. Frank kept his rifle trained on Weber. Their eyes met. In that moment, 2 professionals who had been hunting each other for weeks finally saw each other face to face. Weber spoke in surprisingly good English. You are the one who killed my men in the fog. February 6th, 5 teams eliminated in impossible conditions. Frank said nothing. We thought it was intelligence breach, that you had broken our codes, that we had traitors in our ranks. Weber's voice carried something like respect. We never imagined it was one American sniper with a skill we did not believe possible. Frank's finger stayed on the trigger, but he nodded once. Acknowledgement between professionals. You have won, Weber continued. My network is destroyed. You have accomplished in 18 days what we thought would take months to achieve. I commanded the finest reconnaissance personnel in the Luftwaffe, and you defeated us all. The transport arrived. 17 prisoners loaded under guard. Intelligence documents secured. Detachment S extracted without casualties. Mission success. The captured documents revealed more than anyone had anticipated. Complete Luftwaffe defensive positions throughout the Ruhr. Emergency evacuation routes for key personnel. Plans for Operation Walküre, a March counteroffensive using Germany's last reserves. Most critically, radio codes and frequencies that would allow Allied intelligence to intercept and decode German communications for the remainder of the campaign. General William Keane reviewed the intelligence haul and made a statement that would become legendary in classified military circles. One sergeant with an idea everyone said was impossible may have just shortened this war by a month. But Frank Peterson was not celebrating. He sat in his quarters writing in his journal. The entry was longer than usual. February 24th, 1945. Captured 17 enemy officers. Secured intelligence of extraordinary value. Total personal kills now at 65 since February 6th. Detachment S total at 98. 98 German soldiers who will never go home. 98 families destroyed. 98 lives ended by decisions. I made orders. I gave shots. I fired. The justification still holds. Thousands of Allied lives saved. Campaign shortened by weeks. Strategic objectives achieved beyond all expectations, but I see their faces now, not literally because I never saw most of them, but in my mind, I build faces for the voices I heard through the fog, give them features, ages, families, lives they will never live. Private Martinez told me today that what we have done will save his baby daughter from growing up without a father. He is right. His daughter will have her father because 98 German soldiers do not have theirs. This is war. This is necessity. This is what victory requires, but it is also 98 ghosts I will carry for the rest of my life. Carl found him hours later still writing. Command wants to see you. They are making a decision about your future. Frank closed the journal, stood, prepared himself for whatever judgment was coming. The meeting at Ninth Army headquarters was attended by more senior officers than Frank had ever seen in one room: Colonel Harrison, Major Wilson, General Keane, even a representative from General Omar Bradley's staff. The debate had apparently been ongoing for hours before Frank arrived. Some argued his methods, while effective, represented dangerous precedent for battlefield insubordination, that allowing soldiers to violate direct orders regardless of results undermined military discipline essential to functioning armies. Others maintained that Frank's initiative and adaptability exemplified exactly the qualities modern warfare demanded, that rigid adherence to doctrine in the face of changing battlefield conditions was its own form of failure. The decision came from General Bradley's headquarters. Sergeant Peterson's actions will be classified. His methods will be studied by Special Operations Command. He will receive the Silver Star for exceptional courage and resourcefulness, resulting in elimination of key enemy personnel and acquisition of vital intelligence. The citation was carefully worded to reveal absolutely nothing specific. No mention of fog, no mention of acoustic targeting, no mention of disobeyed orders. Official record would state only that Sergeant Frank Peterson had eliminated numerous enemy combatants through innovative tactics in adverse conditions. The truth would remain classified until 1972. March 15, 1945, Detachment S was quietly disbanded. Members reassigned to conventional units. The experiment was over. The innovation documented. The advantage exploited. Frank was offered a commission as second lieutenant. He declined. I am more comfortable giving advice than giving orders, he told Colonel Harrison. He was reassigned to training duties, teaching selected aspects of his techniques to sniper instructors, carefully omitting the most controversial elements. No one needed to know about firing without visual confirmation. That would remain his secret and his burden. April 18th, the Ruhr pocket surrendered. 317,000 German prisoners, the largest mass surrender of the war to that point. Military historians would later identify the collapse of Luftwaffe effectiveness in the region as a critical factor. Without air coordination, without the spotter network that had made German airstrikes so devastating, the defense had crumbled faster than anyone predicted. Few would ever connect that collapse to the actions of one Montana sergeant and 11 men operating without authorization. In February fog, May 8th, Germany surrendered. VE Day. Victory in Europe. Frank Peterson stood in formation with thousands of other soldiers listening to the announcement. The war he had trained for, fought in, been transformed by was over. He thought about the 98 German soldiers, wondered if their families had received notification yet, wondered if somewhere in Germany 98 mothers were crying today, even as the world celebrated peace. October 1945. Frank returned to Whitefish, Montana. He carried a Silver Star in his duffel bag. Classified memories in his mind, 98 ghosts in his soul. His father Samuel met him at the train station. They embraced without words. Then his father looked at him with eyes that had seen hard things and understood. You learned to listen. Frank nodded. I learned to listen, and I learned that sometimes what you hear carries a weight that never goes away. They walked toward home in silence. The Montana mountains rising around them, the forest where it had all began, waiting like old friends. Frank would resume his pre-war occupation, forest ranger, quiet life in the wilderness. He married Sarah Mitchell in 1947. They had 3 children, Samuel named for Frank's father, Margaret named for his mother, Ellen named for his sister. Neighbors knew him as helpful, skilled at tracking lost hikers, always willing to volunteer for search and rescue operations. Few suspected the mild-mannered ranger had once been responsible for one of the most innovative special operations of World War II. He rarely spoke of the war. When his children asked what he had done to earn his medal, he gave the same answer every time. I listened carefully and did what needed to be done. 1963. Frank received an unexpected letter from U.S. Army Special Forces Command. They were developing advanced training programs, needed consultation from someone with unique expertise. Frank was reluctant. 20 years had passed since the Ruhr. He had built a peaceful life. The last thing he wanted was to revisit those memories. But Carl Jensen, who had maintained correspondence, convinced him. They need what you know, Frank. Another generation of soldiers facing new wars with old problems. You can help them survive what they cannot see coming. Frank spent 2 weeks at Fort Bragg, teaching, demonstrating, sharing techniques he had not discussed in 18 years. The resulting training module was called Non-Visual Target Acquisition. It became standard in advanced sniper training, though its origins remained classified. Frank's only comment after seeing his techniques formalized into doctrine was characteristically modest. Took them long enough to figure out that sometimes you have to shoot at what you cannot see. 1972. The original classified reports were partially declassified. Military researchers began studying Frank's Ruhr Valley operations in earnest. Acoustic targeting systems developed in the 1980s incorporated principles remarkably similar to those Frank had applied intuitively in 1945. Technology catching up to what one Montana hunter had accomplished with nothing but trained ears and patience. 1991, First Gulf War. Operation Desert Storm, a special forces team found themselves pinned down during a sandstorm. Iraqi forward observers were coordinating mortar strikes with devastating accuracy, visibility zero. Standard doctrine said wait for conditions to improve, but the team leader, Captain James Rodriguez, had studied the declassified Peterson reports, had trained in the Fort Benning acoustic targeting module. He made a decision Frank Peterson would have recognized. Rodriguez and his team used modified acoustic targeting techniques to locate and eliminate 3 Iraqi observers during the sandstorm. Mission success. Team extracted safely. His after-action report included a line that would become famous in special operations community. We had technology Peterson could not have imagined. Thermal sights, laser rangefinders, digital communications, but when all of it failed in the sandstorm, we fell back on the Peterson principle. Trust what you hear when you cannot trust what you see. That concept saved our lives and completed the mission. 1987. A package arrived at Frank's Montana home, German postage, return address in Bavaria. Inside was a letter from Hauptmann Klaus Weber, retired, living quietly in a small town near Munich. Frank read it slowly. His German had improved over the years, but Sarah helped with some translations. Herr Peterson, I have only recently learned your name from newly declassified American documents. For 42 years, I believed our network fell to massive intelligence operation. Dozens of agents, sophisticated intercepts, coordinated efforts. Learning that one man accomplished what I attributed to an entire enemy apparatus, I confess I am both humbled and impressed. You were a worthy adversary. More than that, you were an innovator who changed the nature of warfare. I hope you find some peace in knowing that even your enemies recognized your extraordinary achievement. With respect for a fellow professional, Klaus Weber Hauptmann, retired Luftwaffe. Frank showed the letter to Sarah. Said nothing for a long time. Finally, quietly, he spoke. He is right about one thing. I still have not found peace. But at least he understood what we were trying to do. Sarah, who had lived with Frank's nightmares for 40 years, who had held him through episodes he never discussed, put her hand on his. You saved thousands of lives, Frank. That has to count for something. It does, he said. It counts for everything, but it does not make the weight any lighter. November 11th, 2001, Veterans Day. Frank Peterson passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 82. At his funeral, attended by family, friends, and a surprising number of military personnel, his son Samuel read from a letter Frank had written to be opened after his death. I did what was necessary, not what was authorized. History has judged that decision kindly, but the judgment that mattered most came in the moment of choice. When lives hang in the balance, sometimes the rule book must be set aside. This is not license for recklessness. It is recognition that wisdom sometimes speaks in whispers while orders shout. Learn to listen for the whispers. To my family, I am sorry for the nightmares you sometimes heard through the walls. Know that every one of those 98 souls I took weighs on me still, but I would carry that weight 1,000 times over to have saved the lives I saved. To soldiers who may read this, trust your training, trust your judgment, and when those conflict, trust your conscience. I will be with the ghosts now. Hopefully they have forgiven me. Today at Fort Benning, U.S. Army Sniper School, advanced students learn something called the Peterson Principle. The instructor introduces it with a simple question: what do you do when the rule book says impossible, but your judgment says necessary? The discussion explores ethical and tactical dimensions of battlefield initiative. Most students are surprised to learn the principle is named for a real person, a Montana sergeant who saved hundreds of lives in February 1945 through what technically constituted insubordination. In fog-shrouded Ruhr Valley, one sergeant made a choice military doctrine said was impossible and military orders forbade. The 24 shots he fired not only eliminated critical enemy capability, but demonstrated that innovation on the battlefield often comes not from advanced technology or superior numbers, but from willingness of individual soldiers to trust their training, judgment, and instincts. When doing so carries personal risk. Frank Peterson understood they had to act beyond orders, beyond doctrine, beyond limitations others accepted as immutable. The justification was written in those 98 precise shots over 18 days, a calculation that weighed certainty of lost American lives against risk of career and reputation. It was a balance military bureaucracy could never formalize. But frontline soldiers intuitively understand what shocked you most about Frank Peterson's story: his remarkable skill developed hunting Montana elk, his willingness to risk court-martial to save fellow soldiers he would never meet, the scale of impact, how one man's decision directly saved hundreds and indirectly thousands by hastening war's end in a critical sector. In a war remembered for massive armies and industrial destruction, outcomes were often determined by individual choices made in moments of crisis. Choices like Peterson's, to fire into fog when doctrine said it could not be done. This single act proved battle was winnable in conditions previously conceded to the enemy. Changed not just immediate tactical situation, but strategic calculations of commanders on both sides. Sometimes the most profound act of loyalty is knowing when to break the rules.